Welcome to another episode of the Long Distance Worklife. We're here to discuss and answer your questions about how to lead, work, and thrive in remote and hybrid teams. I'm Marissa Eikenberry, and joining me is Wayne Turmel.
That would be me. Hi.
If you have a question that you would like us to answer, you can contact us on our website, longdistanceworklife.com, or email me directly at marissa@kevineikenberry.com. Wayne, today we're going to do one of our one-topic episodes, and I think we should talk about time shifting, or how I've also heard somebody at GitLab describe it was asynchronous work. So we're going to talk about what is it, when is it okay to do, that kind of thing. Are you ready?
Yeah, it sounds vaguely science fiction-y, right?
A little.
It's like, we're going to time shift. You cannot do that, Captain.
Yeah, it sounds like we're about to jump into a time machine or something. Yeah.
Basically, time shifting just means in our brains for the last 100 years, we've had this notion that a workday is 8 hours long and it starts at 7, 8, 9, whatever time we start, and it stops at 3, 4, 5 based on when you started. And regardless of where you work, everybody that you work with is essentially on the same time schedule. Right? That's kind of been the way it works. And for a lot of people with remote work, this means that people like me start work at 6 o'clock in the morning so that I am on pace with those of you back east. And what we have found as people work remotely and they're working from home and they want more flexibility is that is a mixed blessing, that kind of scheduling.
Yes.
And so people want to be able to work when it makes sense to them. Some people are morning people. It really doesn't bother me starting work at 7 a.m.
Well, you're already a morning person, so that makes sense.
I'm already a morning person. And otherwise, I'm sitting around for a couple hours doing nothing until my workday starts. And my body at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon has had quite enough of that.
Right.
And so for me, I've actually been time flexing for a while. And, if I have a class at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I will take a couple hours in the afternoon and take the dog for a walk or run my personal errands or do whatever. A lot of this has been stealth flexibility.
Yes. I've seen that a lot, like on LinkedIn or something. I know that, people say, hey, I'm going to go take a couple hours to go run an errand, or they go on a walk or something. Somebody else I saw, they basically shift their day, kind of like what you were talking about earlier. And so they went outside and worked on their sidewalk in their yard for a couple hours because they're more productive at night. So they just kind of shifted everything over.
And what it boils down to is what is the company's approach. We were talking a couple of shows ago about remote friendly versus remote first. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with flexibility, right? You can have all the flexibility you want, but if I'm in the office at 9 o'clock and I want to reach you and you're not there.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's not
How
really
flexible
flexible
is your work, really?
Right.
And so this is actually a pretty fundamental shift for a lot of organizations, especially as they start to grow, right? Because you start your company and you're living wherever you live, and you might have to adjust for customer time zones, but basically you work whatever time you work.
Right.
But now you hire somebody who lives in another time zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it completely changes everything.
And so when you think, it's interesting because you work from home a lot, but I know that you maintain kind of traditional workplace hours. Now, Tell me, is that a conscious choice, or do you think you ought to do that?
I think it's a little both. For those of you who haven't joined us before, working here at the Kevin Eikenberry Group, this was my first job out of college. I graduated on a Saturday and my first day was Monday. So I don't really know any different. So when I first started, there was definitely this idea of I start my day at 8 and it ends at 4. That's it. And I've kind of adjusted that sometimes a little bit as needed to okay, I do have to go run an errand super quick, or especially when lockdowns and stuff were happening, but you could like get out a little bit. Uh, my husband and I would jump in the car. Hey, let's go get Taco Bell because we've been sitting in our house for 2 weeks. Like, let's just get out somehow.
For
Um,
those of you listening, I am all about taking your spouse to lunch. I'm not sure that that would necessarily uh, fit most companies' health and wellness
yeah,
policies, but
for sure. For sure. Yeah, so, I mean, just little things like that. And I do know that there have been times that I have seen, coworkers and stuff, hey, I'm going to take the afternoon off, or I'm going to, jump off for a couple hours and I'm going to come back on at night. I did this a little bit when I did work remotely full time many years ago, but it was for a particular project. And it was just because the majority of the stuff that I was working on it at night, mostly because I couldn't get interrupted at night. So, but that was a little bit of a different story. So I do think there's a little bit of, I think for me, I like having a set schedule. I like knowing that I'm going to start at 8 and I'm going to stop at 4, and that's just it. I'm going to, take a lunch break at noon. I personally like schedules, but that's just me.
now I would say that it also helps that you are in the same time zone as the majority of people in the organization,
Absolutely.
so that it's very easy for you, for you to
Absolutely.
live on that schedule. There are three, I wrote down three things as you were talking
Perfect.
that make sense to me. The first is when we're talking about asynchronous work, it kind of raises the issue of how much synchronous work do we really need.
Right.
So if your job is leave me alone, let me get my work done, and I don't need to interact with other people in order to make that happen, it
Hmm.
matters less whether I am sitting at my desk at a given time,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
What matters, and this has to do with the whole approach to leadership and managing performance, is are you measuring behaviors such as when do you show up and when do you go to work, or are you measuring the work that gets done? If reports need to be done Friday and you don't need my input on that, I don't really care what time of day you work on it. And
Yeah.
depending on your family situation, depending in this case, it's just you and Parker. So you want to sync your schedules so that you are both available at the same time and you have
Yes.
free time. So that is part of the equation. Uh, this whole idea of what is the work that needs to be done and what's the best way to do it, right? A
Yes.
lot of us started working from home so that we can get stuff done.
Right. Yeah. Because the work still has to get done.
So, uh, when you're thinking about it, is what's the work that we're doing? When do we need to be synchronously available? Now, that's going to depend on the job, right? If you're in a customer service job, you need to be available when customers expect you to be available, whatever
Right.
time
Absolutely.
that is. You may have internal customers
Yes.
that you need to be immediately responsive to. So that's part of the discussion as you're setting up what are my work hours, how flexible can I be, is what are the things that have to happen in order for the work to get done.
Yeah, and I think with that too, I mean, you were mentioning like customer service hours and stuff, and there's a small piece. Well, small's not really quite accurate, but there is a piece of my job that is customer support, and so I have to be around to answer support tickets and stuff like that because when I'm not doing that, well, somebody else is doing that, and that's okay because that's his business, and that he answers them in the off hours. But to your point, like I try to make sure that I'm available during those hours, expecting that that's when I'm going to get the majority of those support tickets. But most of my other projects, it doesn't really matter what time I'm doing those.
Yeah, and so the other thing that you said to me, which is kind of interesting, is oh, I take an hour for lunch or I do this. The problem with working from home for a lot of people is they have this in their head that they've got to work, but they take that to the point where they always have to be available. And so there are a lot of people who don't take the breaks that they would take in the office. They don't take an hour for lunch. They don't get up from their desk every hour and a bit and stretch their legs and get some oxygen and do what they need to do. So that notion of wanting to be responsive to customers, wanting to be responsive to their teammates, afraid they're going to miss a message, um, stops people from actually leveraging the flexibility.
Yeah. I was, when you're talking about that, I was guilty of that when I first started working for Kevin. And
Yeah,
just this,
you were.
yeah, I was going to say, I know I was, and I've gotten a lot better since I got married. But, I know that I was somebody who was, and I accidentally trained the team to expect this of me, which was my fault entirely. But just this idea of, well, I'm tech support, so I have to always be on. Well, first of all, nobody's dying in tech support. Like it can wait until later, almost always. But so I was setting this expectation up that I was available all the time. So if you sent me a Slack message at 7 p.m., I was going to answer you. Why? Because I lived alone and I didn't have anything better to do, to be quite honest about it. And so once I got married and I went to remote working full time, one of the things I knew that I had to do was I'm going to walk into, we had a bedroom set up for our office. And so when I walked into that room, okay, I'm starting my work, and at 4 o'clock, I'm leaving, and that's it. And I had my Slack set to do not disturb and all of that stuff. I mean, yeah, there were occasions that somebody might message me and I might still respond. But now there's, a new culture essentially that I had to train everybody with for myself personally, that if it's after 4 o'clock and you send me a message, I'm not seeing it until the next day. So if it's really important, you need to call me. And that's almost never happened.
Well, and even if I do see it, I ain't guaranteeing I'm going to answer it.
Yes, I'm so thankful for the Slack remind feature, because there are some times where, yeah, I'll see it, but it's right at the end of my workday. And so it's like, I see this, I might respond, but I'm not taking care of this until the next day. And so Slack will remind me about it the next day and I go from there.
Well, as so often, you've said a couple of things just in passing, like duh, that actually require some thinking.
Right.
If you're going to time shift as a policy for an organization, for example, what time is everybody else working?
Yes.
If the goal is somebody has to be there to answer the phone, or somebody has to be there, if you've got 3 people on your IT team, all 3 people don't have to be available at the same time.
Right.
Right. So if you've got somebody on the East Coast and they start their day earlier, and somebody on the West Coast who can finish up the end of the day, great, make it work.
Absolutely.
Right. You've got somebody who's an early bird and is up early anyway, let them work when they're good, and somebody else, as long as the mission critical things are covered.
Yeah, it reminds me, I know I mentioned this slightly in passing a little bit ago. So, we sell disc assessments at the Kevin Eikenberry Group at discpersonalitytesting.com, and I do customer support on that site. And there are only 2 people on the customer support team. It's me and one of our co-founders. And so, I try to take care of the tickets between 8 and 4 o'clock, so that way that can free up him to do the stuff that only he can do. And, and I just message him if I need to, if there's a support ticket that I just don't know how to handle. But after 4 o'clock, that's all him, because, it's his business. So that makes sense. And then he can adjust and decide, do I want to take these at night or not? And so, I mean, there's also even a little bit of training customers to know, like, if you send me an email at 2 o'clock in the morning because you're in Australia, we're not answering it until 8 a.m. at least.
And it's not that you don't like the customers in Australia anymore, or less.
Absolutely. We love
like
them just the same.
Customers here, right? It's just the reality of the situation. And as the workplace changes, we need to make those kinds of decisions. When is it important that somebody be there immediately to respond, and when does a reasonable time frame to respond make sense? The whole idea of we have to be available to each other synchronously is what is leading to people putting in too many hours and people being on Zoom meetings from beginning of the day to the end of the day. Oof. One of the things about hybrid work, and we've talked about this before, and we'll continue to say it until people figure it out.
Absolutely.
Is that hybrid is not just like the office, but with webcams.
Yes, even though people are trying to make it seem that way.
Well, and they always have, because that's what we know. That's how we've always done stuff is we get together and have a meeting.
Right.
For hybrid work to truly work, for flexible work, especially time flexed work, to be able to really happen, we need to re-examine how the team works together. And that means leveraging asynchronous tools. You mentioned whether it's Slack or Microsoft Teams. We do a really good job, although it's time to go in and do a cleanup, of having very mission specific groups
Yes.
in
Yeah.
Slack,
Specific channels for different things, of
so
course.
that if you have a question about something, the whole organization doesn't have to be on the clock in order to answer that. You just need to know that the other person in that conversation is going to answer you.
Right.
That is much easier to negotiate.
Well, and I think our team is also really good about using the do not disturb features in general too, to let, everybody know, hey, I'm heads down for a couple hours. I'm going to change my Slack status. And, if you really need me, call me. Or, like I said, I end my day at 4 o'clock. My Slack goes into do not disturb mode, and you can see that I'm not available.
Well, the other thing that you said, just kind of in passing, and I can't stress this enough because this is traumatic for a lot of people, is
Okay.
this notion that we teach people how to work with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We teach people. It's like, if I tell you I'm in a meeting, but I'm still answering your messages and answering your emails, I have told you it's perfectly okay
Yeah.
to bother me in the middle of a meeting. Whereas if it says Wayne's in a meeting till 2 o'clock and you hear from me at 2:05, the message is I was in a meeting.
Right.
As time shifting and flexibility becomes more important, not only do we have to get better about setting boundaries, right? The other people on our team need to respect those boundaries.
Yes.
And it's funny. People will be much better about respecting those boundaries than we are about setting them, just in
Right.
general. One of the reasons for burning out when you work from home comes from a bunch of guilt and wanting to take one for the team and being a good teammate, to the point where you are draining your own resources. And for flexibility to work, we need to be able to set expectations for the company. I mean, let's start with you're getting paid to do a job. So,
Absolutely.
so the job is going to have certain expectations.
Yes.
Now, with that, what requires you to be synchronous with the rest of the team? What doesn't? We figure that out. What is the expected availability? What is the expected response time to
Yes.
messages and whatever? What are the tools that we are expected to use?
Right. Google Drive, Slack, whatever. And I know there's a lot of asynchronous tools coming out all the time too.
Yeah, and new tools every day, and that's a whole other
A different
source
episode.
of that's a whole other source of source that we don't want to get into. But these are the things that we need to determine. These are the things, and they may be up for review.
So with that, I know that you're mentioning a lot of stuff that, us as workers can do and, ask our leaders about. But I guess from a leader's perspective, how do you set these boundaries? I mean, are some people just waiting until they come up? Should we be trying to make that culture ahead of time? What should
There
they be
are a
doing?
couple of problems. That's a fabulous question. Yes, the organization should be thinking about this. And if you are in HR or you are in operations and you're trying to figure out how does this work, start doing your research. There's plenty of good work out there. Long distance leader, long distance teammate, uh,
Links in the show notes.
and bunches of other content which will tell you what you should be thinking about. The problem is that a lot of senior executives have never worked in a flexible environment. They've always worked, sometimes literally 9 to 5,
Right.
but they've always worked in a highly structured environment. And so if you're coming from that environment and you're trying to adjust, you don't know what you don't know.
That's true. Absolutely.
So having the company make all the decisions makes no sense. right? What needs to happen is you need to sit with your team and you need to say, okay, what is the work that needs to get done? What is the mission critical work that absolutely has to be done synchronously? What can be done asynchronously with a giant asterisk? And what doesn't matter where it happens and when it happens?
Absolutely.
Set those boundaries, set those expectations, and let people tell you how this works. And then, and this is the part that people stress about, just because you set a policy doesn't mean it's written in stone.
Right.
Try it a month, 2 months, 3 months. Is the work getting done? Are customer complaints rising? Is there, is working with the other parts of the organization creating a problem? And then re-examine it and do the process again until you find something that works.
Yeah, we always reserve the right to be smarter.
There you go. I think looking at the time, good Lord, as always, that's probably it. But if you're looking for the nutshell of this whole thing, it's what's the work that needs to be done? Really, not your preference, what really
Actually.
needs to be done synchronously and asynchronously.
And sometimes meetings are not it. But that's a different
Sometimes
episode
meetings
too.
are not it, and sometimes they are.
Right.
Right. So here's the thing: if you're in the middle of your flex time and there absolutely needs to be a meeting, does it matter that you are in a baseball cap and t-shirt?
Depends on the
Probably
company.
not.
Yeah.
Right. Do the meeting, do what you need to do, and go back to your life until
Absolutely.
it's time for you to do more work. So this is going to be an ongoing process. We're going to constantly be learning about this, and we need to be open to constant re-examining in order to find the optimum way to make time shifting work.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for answering this question today, Wayne. I think we had a great conversation today.
Well,
I
you
hope
answered as much of it as I did, which is the way this is supposed to work, frankly.
Again, we're getting smarter all the time. So thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Long Distance Work Life. If you'd like, we'd love if you would rate, review, and subscribe, and tell your friends about us. We're on YouTube and everywhere that you get your podcasts. You can also connect with us at longdistanceworklife.com. And we would love to answer your questions in a future episode. So you can either contact us on the website or email me directly at marissa@kevineikenberry.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.